That's the Doon Art, which is a Bonny Doon Art Studio Tour. It's Bonny Doon Studio Tour is what they're calling it. But I always want to inject the art. But it is art. And so I have number 13.
Yeah, we're lucky 13. Yeah.
Lucky number 13, Sean Walker here is one of the artists that is in this year's and in the past. How many times have you done this now, Sean?
This is our third year. Third year, yeah. So, and it's bigger every year.
And that yup was his better half.
Hello.
Laura Barnes Walker and her better half. There it goes both ways. It's a complimentary thing. Laura Barnes Walker will be having 2 performances of her tribal belly dance troupe, Calla Lily Tribal. Is that how you call it? That's it?
Calla Lily Tribal. And also joining us, the show has expanded a little bit. I think the first year the belly dance performance was 2.5 minutes. The second year it was 10 minutes. This year we're doing about a 16 or 17 minute show started by Circle Road. Tribal belly dance, which is me and Amy Miller and Julie DePrima. We're going to be opening the show, and then after that, it's going to be the student troupe Calla Lily Tribal at 3 p.m. each day.
And they will do 2 performances. Calla Lily, there will be a choreographed, really fun, great La Buscara.
En la Busqueda.
Endless. I don't know how to speak it, but take Laura's word for it. A Spanish band song, and there will also be a bit, which is the interesting thing that I would love our audience to know about, and that is tribal belly dance does a type of dancing together. It is not the normal belly dancer. She's the one on there titillating us all. This is a group endeavor, and there are various people that lead, and it's improvisational.
That's right. In fact, most of the show is improvisational. We have 3 improvisational pieces in the show and 1 choreography, and that's the En la Busqueda song.
And so just so you know, folks, we're going to talk to Laura a little bit later in the program. She's going to be the guest for the second half. We're doing Johnny Carson style. They're sitting next to each other. So she can add whatever she feels is fit. But really, we're focusing right now on Sean Walker. Sean, I love your artwork, and people...
Thank you.
Santa Cruz peeps, Saturday and Sunday, July 27th and 28th. If you haven't done it before, the Bonny Doon Studio Tour is happening. It's an annual event, and it starts at 11 a.m. and it goes to 6 p.m. There's brochures all around town where you have a map, and you have numbers of people's studios, and there's 20
this year, yep.
20 studios that you'll be able to visit. And there's wine and cheese. There's all kinds of amazing events. Also, if you don't find the paper version of this, you can go to Bonny Doon Studio Tour.com, and there you'll be able to also see exactly the same thing. You'll be able to click through all 20 kind of boxes of artist studios and see their work. And much of it is for sale. So if you love something a lot, you can get it. And then there's a few performances, obviously the one we were just talking about with Laura Barnes Walker. But Sean Walker and Laura, what it is they're coming to your home.
Yeah, it's an open studio show. What we do is we pretty much have a garden show for us because it's the only place that we can accommodate that many people. And when the belly dancers come out, we have a stage for them to perform on, and it really, really just packs the place. That's always our biggest draw of the day.
His art's the biggest draw.
And you can see his art actually from the street. You have a very large piece that is kind of where your road turns off. Is it a turtle? There's a whale. I'm trying to remember in my mind.
Well, I got several really big ones, and we initially had last year we had the great white shark piece. He was 8 feet by 6 feet, I think. He's pretty big, and that was visible from the street. And I might do that again this year, but we did have some vandalism issues last year, so we kind of moved the stuff where it's not as prominent when you first drive into the property now. But once you pull in the driveway, it's there. You can't miss it. Yeah.
And the type of artwork that Sean Walker does is, to me, Aboriginal. It has elements of some.
Yeah, it's definitely just completely inspired by the artwork from the Pacific Northwest, so all up through the Alaska Panhandle, British Columbia, even down into Oregon, Washington, And I always figured that, eventually they probably would have drifted this far south anyway, so it just sort of fit with the redwoods we have, and it just kind of goes with the whole forest. When you go up and see some of the provincial parks in British Columbia where they actually have the Tlingit longhouses, and you can see some of the real artwork still there, it just really jumps out in that environment. It's so bold and it's so big that you just can't deny it. And that was really what drew me to the art form in the first place, just that.
And this is an art form that you've been drawn to as a child.
Well, I did all kinds of artwork as a child. I started out just kind of messing around in the garage with lots of power tools, and when I got my first jigsaw when I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and I figured out that you could cut any kind of form out of wood. That really is what started it all. I made like duck decoys and little cutouts of fish and things like that, and it just grew from there. But I spent a couple of years up in Alaska as a sea kayak guide and got to see, a lot of the backcountry from this little tiny floating craft. And to be able to think of these big, great big bold art pieces that you could see from the shore when they were originally there, to try and mentally put those art pieces out there, it just, set my imagination going, and it's been rolling ever since.
Yeah, your artwork still very much embodies your love and your inspiration for your style of artwork. You have a sculptural effect to it because you're painting these animal forms mostly.
Yeah.
A lot of marine animals onto wood.
Right. Yeah.
And so you, in your practice, are melding woodworking, the jigsaw, the burning of the wood to engrave, I guess.
Yeah. All of those things come together. I use the wood burning to get the initial design on the panel. So I'll build the panel. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small. They can be very finished or they can be rough. It depends if it's going to be an indoor piece or an outdoor piece. And
so when you say big, we're talking 6 feet wide.
Yeah.
Big.
My real the basis for this was when we moved up to Bonny Doon. Was the first time I ever, since I left my parents' house, was able to have like a shed, a space to work in on my own, where I could do anything. It wasn't an apartment. It wasn't anything like that.
It's a studio.
It was a studio, yeah, and it was tiny.
It's a shed, but
the initial studio space that I worked in, I think, was 8 feet by 6 feet or something like that.
Yeah, we used to hit our head on the door on the way.
Every time. Yeah, it had a door was about 5 feet tall. I affectionately call it the shed, but it has had many names depending on who sees it. Sometimes it's a studio, sometimes it's a man cave. I don't know. It's all of those things.
It's definitely a man cave.
It's heavily decorated. Heavily decorated on the outside. No, it's welcoming to everyone.
Oh, okay.
No, I made a hula hoop in there last night.
That's right, you did. Last night, yeah.
You guys have too much fun.
So while we were up in Bonny Doon, one of the things that we noticed, we never even knew when we moved up there that area even existed in Santa Cruz. We'd only lived up here for a couple of years and got the opportunity to move up there. And seeing the mist come in and fill in between the redwood trees was a phenomenon that I had seen. It took me right back to living up in the spruce trees. We lived in a little town called Whittier, Alaska, that was way out in the back of beyond. At the time, you could only get there by train or boat or plane. And we lived in a little tiny cabin with no electricity. But it was an interesting time, definitely a formative time, especially in my artistic levels of artistic inspiration. So, but anyway, the combination of the fog and the trees just took me right to that art form, and I thought, well, I'd love to make something like that. So I started looking around, and the piece that I came across that really sort of set me on the path was a piece called the Raven Screens, and they're 2 giant panels made of cedar wood. I think they ended up in the Denver Museum, ended up with them sometime around the 1930s, and they're very big, which is what got us on this tangent in the first place. They're about 14 feet long and maybe 6 feet tall. And I've never actually been able to see them in person, but you come across the photos of these pieces often in anything about Pacific Northwest artwork, because they are one of the finest examples of that art form that are around today.
And the colors are very bold, bright, basic colors, would you say? And this is also what you found? Yeah,
and this is kind of what makes these pieces so bold, is that they have a very limited color palette. So initially, you had artists that were painting with your powdered charcoals, and they used some pigments that they could get just from what was around, but black was the predominant color, and they'd mix the powdered charcoal with the fat from salmon eggs, and that's turns out to be wonderfully effective fixative for the paint, and it didn't require any. It's already oily, and so they would paint that on there, and these pieces would last for many years. And the black doesn't have a tendency to fade as much as the lighter colors. So it started out all black, but then Hudson's Bay Trading Company came in the 1800s, and they brought red pigments, and they didn't have very many to choose from. They were all powdered, but that's where the red and the white really came from. But then some pieces, especially the interior screens, you'll see a lot of like the turquoise color that they were able to come up with, and which would fade really quickly, so that was kind of limited to the interior screens.
And so, Sean Walker, what type of paint do you use?
I'm just using acrylics these days, but I've used all kinds of stuff. When I started out, I was using Tester's model paint. Speaking of the huffing the fumes, man, I'm glad to get away from that stuff. But that's what I had experience with in doing some modeling, building models as a kid and stuff. And I had a huge collection of colors, so that was a paint that I started with, and it does hold up really well, but it's a pain to use, especially if you're doing anything of size. So these days I'm used to using water-soluble acrylics, and I like the effect of them.
One of the aspects that I very much enjoy of your pieces is that I feel each one of them has a whole backstory, and that many of them are probably based in mythologies of the Pacific Northwest, stories that you have processed and been inspired by, would you say?
Oh yeah. And
I want to chime in to say that Sean was a kayak guide for 10 years in San Francisco, in Alaska, and also here in Santa Cruz, and I think a lot of his artwork comes from what he's been seeing out there too.
For sure.
And he continues to kayak and fish constantly, so he's in the environment a lot.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Laura, because I was going to bring that up. How also, along with these myths, you are very much inspired by the biology, the ecology of this site-specific place, right here, of our beautiful Santa Cruz and Monterey Bay.
Yeah.
And so let's just talk about that for a second, and then we'll come back to the mythology thing.
Sure.
I am not a, let's say, scientific medical illustrator person. I wouldn't be able to look at that and say, hey, that octopus doesn't have that thing right there. But I hear from experts that
Marine biologists.
that when you are inspired to do, let's say, a specimen, a type of fish, a type of marine animal that you're creating, you get into the biology of it. You will not find something that is not supposed to be there.
Well, there's some artistic license, and I think my pieces these days are, they're a little bit more perhaps broader in scope than they used to be. But that is something that I have always tried to do is to try to put something in there. So if I'm painting, say, a fish, I want to look at a couple of fish ID books and find out something about that particular fish that's going to stand out. A lot of times, because of the limited colors I use, I'm not going to be able to paint, or on the panel, really the exact colors of that particular creature, but I'll need to figure out how can I work these 4 colors into some kind of a pattern that will immediately jump out, and someone who is familiar with that bird or fish or whatever it is going to immediately look at it and click and go, hey, that's a red brotula, I recognize that.
Right. So I think that's what's really beautiful and gives depth to your pieces, is that each one of them does have this potential to be biologically correct.
Yeah, to some extent, at least to be recognizable as its individual, species, yeah.
And that this is your rendering of that animal.
Yeah.
Through the prism of your experiences and being with the Northwest, and then using this style of work.
And I did bring this one piece in today, even though the radio audience can't see it.
Yeah, but we got the video going, and so you can just put it out there for a second.
I just hold it up here for a second.
And so what it is, folks, is it's a type of fish.
It's actually this piece is an osprey.
It's a bird. Excuse me.
It's a bird.
I was just looking at the bottom half of it before I could really.
Yeah, and
and the osprey is carrying a fish.
the fish. Yeah.
And the osprey is black and white. Which is its colors.
Pretty much, yeah. They're
much.
like a black and dark brown with the white chest, and the reason I just picked this up when we were talking about the little identifying characteristics in the piece is that the ospreys are. We have them here too, and in fact, they're making a comeback in the Bay Area. Actually, I just read. But this was from up in Humboldt County. I was up in Shelter Cove last month doing an extended fishing trip up there with some of my NCKA bros. Woo, give a shout out to NCKA on the radio.
Fishing!
And and so the osprey has got a black stripe that covers his eye when you see him. So it looks like any other hawk generally to most people, but you can easily see that little sort of bandit mask on the osprey when they fly over. And this particular one, we were just sitting on the beach, hanging out in the morning after the fishing tournament was over for me for the day, and this osprey happened to fly over with a rockfish in his talons, which I had seen them catch steelhead and trout before, but that was the first time I'd ever seen one with a saltwater fish. And so he had to probably snatch that little fish out of maybe 4 feet of water.
So it dove.
Yeah, they can get down to maybe 4 to 6 feet, depending on how high up that they decide to make their descent and get their velocity up. But and then they have an interesting thing they'll do with the fish too, is they'll grab it, but then as they lift it up off the water, no matter what kind of fish it is, they orient it so that it is always facing forward to create the least drag, and then they'll fly off with it to wherever they want to have breakfast, lunch, or dinner, whatever time of day it is. This case, it happened to be breakfast we got to see them have.
They're aerodynamically savvy.
They are. They're very interesting birds.
And the rockfish, now that you mention it looks like a rockfish. You can see that the beak, the mouth of the rockfish. Kind of. He's
got some spines and fins on there, and in this case, I painted him red to sort of give it a little bit of contrast. And in actuality, the fish I saw was more of a black rockfish, not a vermilion. But
and the image has been painted upon a wooden. Can you tell us about the wood?
Yeah,
because it's been finished.
Yeah, so this panel.
It's an indoor piece.
Yeah, this panel's an indoor piece. It's on like 1/4-inch thick heart redwood, which actually came from coworkers' house when they turned paneling into wainscoting. They ended up with all these 4-foot pieces of this beautiful, beautiful redwood, which it's almost like working with balsa. It's very light, so even big interior pieces can still just be, hung on the wall.
Yeah, because when you get big, it's hard to...
This stuff, I think, our best guess was it might have been milled sometime in the 30s or 40s. So you don't really see this kind of wood really much these days.
That's why
this is probably from a really big tree.
Yeah, I had to ask you about it because I've never seen redwood that thin before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And then you added the burnishings. Would you call that?
Right, yeah, distress it a little bit. So I'll build the panel and then
edges
kind of hit it around the edges with a blowtorch to scorch it a little bit and give it a little bit of extra texture. And
I think you're the first painter I've ever talked to who uses a blowtorch.
A blowtorch.
As well as a jigsaw.
It is an interesting kind of mix of all kinds of things. I'm using saws and big power tools. I've done some pieces where I use chainsaws beforehand. But in the end, it's all about eventually getting a nice, smooth finish on the wood to put the image on, whatever it's going to be.
And then it's very shiny. You used some kind of...
these are, especially the indoor ones, I like to top coat with a polyurethane. I like to use a gloss coat because it really makes any little, the subtleties and the texture of the wood really pop out at you. And it also keeps it a nice, smooth, impermeable finish so that if it gets dust on it, you just use a little water and a cloth and you can dust it right off and you don't have to worry about it warping or anything like that.
And it shows the brush strokes as well, I think.
Yep.
I leave all
the brush strokes, and even you can on this piece there's a little bit of crackle in the white on the osprey, and I leave all that stuff because I just figure, in the good old days when the stuff was being done out in the forest somewhere, their conditions weren't particularly controlled, and you'd have all kinds of little imperfections in the pieces, and so I just go with it. Yeah, I like that.
And you like to keep some of your pieces that are meant for the outdoors.
I do, and I like to see how they handle the winters that we get in Bonny Doon. Our place is on the seaward side of the ridge, so we get the extreme weather. We do get snow and hail and sleet and all kinds of interesting stuff in the wintertime. So it's a kind of a little experiment for me to see how the pieces will hold up. And then about once a year I'll go out and generally right before the show just do a little light sand on them, hit them with another top coat, and they look like new.
And so tell me, how many times have you done the Dune art?
This is the third year.
Yeah.
I keep looking at Laura how many years?
This is the third year, and we were there, 3 years ago. That was the first year Dune Art ever happened, and, we went for it.
And there were 13 of us, I believe, the first
we were the
year.
last one.
We were lucky 13, the last ones on the list.
I really wanted to keep that number. Yeah. I love that number.
It's a great number.
Yeah, we held on to that.
Okay, so let's say I come to you. I've got this crazy myth that I found while I was on honeymoon in Kauai, and it's like, Pele and her sister, and we won't go into exactly what I'm talking about, but some flying feminine parts. And I come to you and I say, hey, this is such a great story. What do you think? Would you be able to, maybe, if it's inspiring enough to you?
Yeah, and I've done commission work before.
There's a word for that.
I do it a little bit differently these days. Now when people come to me with a commission, I'll agree to it, but then I kind of come up with a design, and if I build the piece, it's sort of like if you've come to me with a commission, I'll build the piece and you get first dibs on it. But too many times I've had people get overly involved in the artistic process. And I mean, and it's always worked out, but for me, my whole reason to do this is for my own enjoyment, so that I get something out of it. and
that's the main.
Yeah, and the design and everything, I gotta retain control over that. So these days I don't ask too many questions when people come to me with a commission idea. I just sort of say, sure, I'll try that.
There you go, folks. Advice from a seasoned artist who is experienced. Hopefully you can take his advice and not have to experience some of it yourself. This is Sean Walker talking about his work. He's going to be showing his work and allowing some of his pieces to be sold to the lucky person who has it.
And we're going to have I've got a whole bunch of different things too. I did the interior and the exterior Pacific Northwest pieces. I have some things that are more like just interesting, whimsical garden art they're also fish, but they turned out pretty cool. And then I went up to Shelter Cove to do this fishing trip, and we were going to target these big Pacific halibut. These are great big flatfish. They're 60 to 100 pounds generally, big guys. So we needed some special landing tools to kind of deal with them, since we're all fishing out of kayaks, little tiny boats. And
I'd like to see how that.
So
Once you
I
caught
ended
it, what do you do with it?
Yeah, well, I still got to figure that out, since I kind of skunked on the halibut this year on that. But I built some harpoons, which we found out later we can't use. So they just turned into wall hangers. You can talk to the Department of Fish and Game about that. But it led me into building a set of just tools. They're generally like your fillet knife and your gaff, which is a hook to land the fish, and a little bonker to knock them out. And so I made a couple of sets of those that seem to be very popular. I just donated one to an event we had last weekend for to raise money for a friend of ours, and it was very well received. There was a lot of clamor over that piece.
All right, so women, listen up. Saturday and Sunday, if you've got that guy who doesn't really like to do artwork, tell him you've got the art place to go, and that's at Sean Walker's place, number 13, July 27th and 28th. And the hours of the studios are open are from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. If you need more information, please go to Bonny Doon Studio Tour.com. This is the third annual event, and it's not to be missed, folks. Some really amazing artists. Maybe in the second half of the show, we might talk about some of the other people that are showing.
There's all kinds of artists in a number of different mediums that are going to be participating.
Yes, it's a beautiful show, and then there'll be the performances.